everyone, and welcome back to Garry on Lockdown. I hope you are feeling a little less locked down these days. But even as one risk diminishes, others haven't gone anywhere. Some threats have grown while we were busy elsewhere, a typical threat pattern. And don't forget that everything is interconnected. Let me make a simple chess analogy. It's not enough to see the threats and changes in the position. You have to understand how they all affect each other. And even if we want to specialize in one area, we cannot ignore how it's linked to others, sometimes in very surprising ways. For example, when it became clear 2 years ago that we were facing a global pandemic, which areas of digital rights and cybersecurity could you imagine becoming more critical? Some were relatively obvious, such as working and studying from home, and how that created 1 billion new points of attack outside of corporate firewalls. Others have been more complicated, with geopolitical elements influencing threats against suddenly overtaxed healthcare infrastructure. Ransomware attacks might not seem very relevant to you personally until one shuts down your local hospital hardware. US President Joe Biden recently warned in a press conference that the threat of cyber attacks related to Russia's attacks on Ukraine would impact on Americans. And then we have the rise of attention on cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and on NFTs, including my own, I admit. These have been tied to people staying at home with more disposable income and eager to explore new things, including new tech. So are cryptocurrencies just a fad, a speculation boom soon to be forgotten, or to exist only on the margins? Are they a powerful tool for convenience and independence from central banks, bringing freedom and efficiency to an ancient monetary system? Or are they a threat, a weapon abused by bad actors and criminals to hide in the shadows? As in almost always the case in the real world of new technology, the answer to all these questions is yes. There is a bubble aspect. Yes, there are great benefits. Yes, there are also dangers, which, as usual with powerful new tools, are greater in the early days before systems and regulations can catch up. The old conventional wisdom is that people become more risk averse during a crisis. We want to go back to the way things were before, to press undo and rewind until we feel comfortable again. But that has always been a myth. There is no going back. No matter what happens with the crisis and the virus, the world has changed forever, for worse, and in some cases for better. My guest on Lockdown today knows more than just about anyone about these better and worse scenarios, as her job is to analyze and respond to them. I've asked CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, Jay Bellew, is joining me to talk about why it's not enough for companies to just throw tons of money at cybersecurity. They have to see the big picture. I'm also interested in how that translates to most of us who are not CISOs or CEOs, not presidents or prime ministers, but who want to make intelligent individual decisions about our security and privacy. A Lockdown welcome to you, Jaya.
Oh, thank you so much, Garry. It's such a pleasure to meet you.
Let's start with what I was just discussing about how everything is connected. The pandemic has amplified various cybersecurity threats, but I also like to hear some good news. We need good news these days, if there are any, of course. How has the landscape changed for companies and individuals? And what positive developments can you tell us about?
So I think the best thing is the fact that, it's done this huge acceleration in terms of digital transformation. So companies have been forced to change. And there's a good joke, like who's had more impact on your ability to have agility and work from home and work from anywhere? Was it your CIO or was it COVID-19? And everybody knows it's COVID-19. So I think we shouldn't negate some of the more positive impulses and the fact that not only are we getting as a society more online and more capable online, we're actually extending the realm of innovation and what that means in terms of being able to touch people's daily lives with the good sides of internet.
So, okay, it's fair to say that in an ideal world, people wouldn't have to think very much about their security and privacy. But every day, there's a new hack. A new leak or risk announced.
Yeah.
And there's a panic and a backlash, or maybe worse, almost no response at all. So if there is such a thing, what is its appropriate level of paranoia?
Yeah.
Because
sorry.
Yeah, it's for individuals, for companies to have. And how can we be safe without feeling that we live under siege, sort of a permanent, never-ending siege?
Yeah. So again, I have a sort of professional dystopia because all people who work in information security have to be professionally paranoid. I even have a T-shirt that says that. But I think the point is you don't really want to carry on this level of fear onto everybody else. They should have a sane, healthy ability to enjoy the benefits of technology. But, there is a certain degree of caveat emptor, which I do think we all need to possess, which we somehow let go of. And that's probably because in cybersecurity, more specifically than any other thing, we have created a market for lemons. There's this famous paper, I think in the 70s, that was written by an economist whose name always so escapes me at the moment, where he basically said, we are having huge degree of information asymmetry between the buyer and the seller of goods. And this particular phenomenon where the buyer wants to just get something at a reasonable price, but is not necessarily clued enough about what are all the pitfalls and the dangers, et cetera, especially around technology. And the seller does know. And the seller realizes that if he holds on to very high priced goods, they may not get sold. But, if he could sell a crappy thing for an average price, it probably will. So this information asymmetry between what's good and bad between the buyer and the seller actually encourages poor security decisions to be made, because then the buyer is buying not on the basis of, am I buying the more secure product, but am I getting, the cheapest price, or am I going after a certain brand? These types of decisions have led us slowly but surely from the 1970s up until now to create the ecosystem of insecurity that we currently live in. And whether that's because of insecure protocols, whether that's because of dependency on very specific security libraries and open source libraries that clungle together make up our modern infrastructure, or the fact that we're buying in plethora a lot of IoT devices that are inherently insecure on the basis of price alone, all of this different information asymmetry has led to the problem that we have now, which is that, cool things actually, like cryptocurrency or a secondary financial market, which is there to, help the unbanked get banked, or to do money transfers for people who would never be given credit or an account if they're working in a foreign country to send money back home. Crypto plays a vital role in this type of economy that needs to happen for a large portion of the world that doesn't have a credit score. So I find it serves a very useful, almost humanitarian purpose in that regard. But because of all of these things that we haven't resolved in this shaky ecosystem, we've made it possible for the downsides to trump the potential upsides.
You talked about a paper from the 70s, half a century ago. I mean, that sounds to me like just, like we're talking about the Trojan War now. This is just because in the world of this modern tech, every 5 minutes matters. So this is 50 years. So the risk then, of this asymmetrical approach, the sellers and buyers, was relevant, but not life threatening. Okay, it's you may not have the best coffee machine. I'm not sure there were coffee machines in the 70s. It's
Yeah.
okay. I'm not so sure.
They did the dripping
Yeah,
thing, remember?
yeah. This is
Steak and
yeah.
the-
Whatever. This is it's a washing machine. So it's a dishwashing machine. But today we're talking about risk that is just it's immense. It's
yeah.
just it's the your information can be stolen because you wanted this IoT device that it's sold by a big brand name that has a big experience in doing coffee or dishwashing or freezers for 100 years and almost no experience in cybersecurity. So it seems to me that after so many years working with Avast and attending these conferences that no matter how much we are warning people, it's still just somehow they're not heeding the warnings. So it's
No,
just it's they keep doing the same things as if this not so much at stake.
yeah, but again, I feel it's unfair to only burden shift to the buyer, to the person that should be with caveat emptor to these products, because really, this is my point. There's also a seller's responsibility here, or a maker's responsibility. And you said the 70s was like a generation Trojan war. I agree with you. But Garry, if we peel back the onion of the current protocol stack that we run our internet on, our mobile telecommunications and our regular internet communications are based on protocols that connect networks to each other. For the internet, that's the BGP, that's the Border Gateway Protocol, where you take one network and you hook it to another network on the internet. That protocol is from the 70s. SS7, the secure signaling layer, which is the foundation of all telecommunication services, is from 1976. So, we are talking about ancient, if we go to the Trojan War, ancient protocols, which are holding up YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, name it. So that's what we're depending on. And we suddenly think that despite that decrepit layer, that foundation, that we can build all this modern technology stacks on top of it. And it's not just those modern technology stacks that we're building today. It's the fact that they're using libraries. So I don't know if you heard about the Log4j incident. That happened this Christmas. A lot of people who are in my profession did not have a great Christmas, New Year's, because we found a vulnerability in a very widely used open source library, which is used by a lot of Java applications. And there was a huge vulnerability there that was also easy to utilize to compromise an attacker or a target who did not patch. And we were busy this whole Christmas and New Year's fixing this. And it wasn't easy because the people who make all these products, they don't even know that they're using this library in the first place. Of the roughly 50% of things that we would need to get a patch from a vendor, the vendor doesn't have a patch available. So up until today, we're vulnerable for those kinds of things all across the internet.
It's very interesting because I knew about the work that's been done in the 60s. That's where the concept of internet was invented. The doctoral thesis of Professor Leonard Kleinrock about packet switching back in 1962. In 1963, Joseph Licklider, one of the leading scientists in DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, he wrote a paper with his team called Intergalactic Computer Network. And he basically described all the components of the future internet, Skype included, voice over IP.
Cool.
And in 1969, the first signal was sent from UCLA. It's a lab led by Professor Kleinrock to Stanford. So on October 29. So I was honored actually to do a keynote speech 50 years later when they celebrated this great event. But I was not aware that the protocols, they were so ancient because they says the origin goes back to the 60s. But the fact is that we are relying on the security from the years of the Cold War, from Brezhnev's era.
Yes.
Wow,
yes.
Wow, that's and we are basically on this ancient foundation we're trying to build it's skyscrapers.
Yes, absolutely. And to just give you an example, there is I'm doing a talk at the Mobile World Congress on 5G security. But the biggest issue to 5G security is not some of the newer things that we're building, but the interdependency of all of these different stacks from cloud and the regular telecom, and that SS7 layer, there's still a whole bunch of attacks just there in that foundation. So trying to build something on top doesn't help if you have these lower level problems.
So it seems to me that we are giving more bad news to our audience. So okay. Any good news? Any
Well,
just give us some hope. That says
yeah.
we're not doomed.
No, I mean, look, there's a lot of people with a lot of passion and a lot of energy trying to fix this. I think that's the best news. And you mentioned Biden. He's doing a lot now for solving some of this interdependency issue, because a lot of the problem is because it's buried in a certain degree of obscurity. Vendors don't know what they have in their product. So what we're trying to do now is that onion that is so hidden is trying to unpeel it. And one of the things that Biden has pushed is this idea of a software bill of materials, so that you have basically an ingredients list from every single piece of software, because we don't know. And we should have, I mean, the same capability on hardware. That's already hard enough because we make all our hardware in China. And anyway, that's a complexity in and of itself to understand that. But software is global. We're all using the same things everywhere. So there's a vulnerability in one place, it affects us all. So having something that's able to like kind of peel the packaging and then understand what the subcomponents are is super important for this entire ecosystem. And the other thing that I think we really need to address is the long tail of vulnerabilities that we have. That's something else that's a very strong program in the US specifically, but also across Europe with ENISA. And really examine things like new security by design principles that are not so new, but are, from a vendor perspective, very new, which is zero trust networks. So the White House announced that they also want to do that. This is something that we are also trying to do across Europe, but with different vehicles like the Network and Information Security Directive and consumer product improvements as well. So all of these things together, that makes me hopeful for the future, but we're not there yet. And in that time, it's dovere non povere. I'm killing the pronunciation, but that was what between Reagan and Gorbachev, trust but verify.
You said we're not there yet. So are you talking about cybersecurity experts, companies like Avast, or about regulators, or both?
Both.
Yeah, because I was under the impression that GDPR, with all the publicity surrounding this document, addressed very narrow issues. So you talked about the vendors. So and I'm still waiting for regulators to actually to put some not responsibility on the vendors, on the manufacturers, because it seems to me that they basically have no responsibility before customers for insufficiency of their products.
Yes. Yeah. But there's so much to unpack just there. Like, what is a vendor's responsibility? To what extent should we have a sort of right to tinker or improve products? Should you be able to fix your car if your car is just a giant computer? Would that mean that you would be taking away any intellectual property from the vendor? How long does a vendor, if they give you something like your phone, how long are they mandated to support it? If you don't feel like buying a new phone every 4 years, should the vendor still support updates of software and firmware to that device? How long would you want to keep your phone? And it's one thing when it's your phone, but Garry, what if we buy a smart refrigerator, like you mentioned, or washing machine? How often do we replace those things? Well, once every 10 years. You don't want vulnerabilities that are existent on there to still exist because of that long tail, but you also want vendor support for all of that to make sure there's consistent patching and support.
But that's something that I think the companies like Avast, could initiate. I think it's this very important to lobby the regulators, because from my experience, talking to people who are in charge of these regulations or writing these regulations, and watching them hearing testimonies of the captains of big tech, I'm not confident that they do understand what they're doing and what they have to do. I think we need just to educate them and to push them in the right direction. It's as you say, we are not yet there, but the question is not that we haven't reached a destination. Are we walking in the right direction? That's a question to me.
I think, again, this is the reason that I'm so hopeful. I think we are. I do think we could be doing more. One of the things that I really think that we should be doing more of, for example, is right now there's a lot of detractors, and we make it possible for them to exist and to do the detraction. I would like to see more privacy and anonymity provided, and while keeping our cryptography strong, rather than looking for ways to break our crypto. That being said, the biggest reasons that are given by law enforcement to put our cryptography in danger is because they're trying to go after a few bad actors, these hard targets. And I really believe that we need to find ways to collaborate with law enforcement to get those hard targets, make sure that the places that we know about, for example, DDoS actors or cyber criminals that we know are operating out there, or people who we can trace based on cryptocurrency that's moving a particular direction, that we find them and we take them down. Because if we can do that as a community and we can help solve that problem, then we don't need to give up what I believe is almost a fundamental right to privacy and security and anonymity, which is basically guaranteed by some of the cryptographic measures we have across the internet today.
Okay, you said this magic word, cryptocurrency. That's the biggest buzzword these days. And I think a lot of people still tune out when they hear about crypto. It's a cryptic word, and the coins are often confused with the blockchain tech itself.
Yeah.
I've seen how cryptocurrencies can provide security and liberty to groups who could not operate safely in authoritarian regimes. But there is also a dark side. Again, is a balance. So the bad guys, they often find these transactions as a gold mine. So what are your thoughts here, and how can we deal with the negatives while preserving and expanding the positives?
Yeah, so, hackers will go where there's something to be gained. It's just a very simple phenomenon. So right now, when you look at the cybercrime market, it's pretty much the largest, most lucrative place to be if you're any kind of criminal. So there's more money in the cybercrime market than the entire international drug trade. So why be a drug dealer? It's so complex to move all this physical stuff around, and you have to deal with your channels and markets. Meanwhile, you can actually net more. And I think there's no greater poster child for this phenomenon of which crime does pay. It's ransomware. And the person who's probably made the most money from it, surprisingly, is someone like Kim Jong-un, who, according to a UN report, netted anywhere between $2 to $3 billion on ransomware. And I think last year alone, he made something like 500 million. So this is an insane amount of money to think that North Korea, with a single internet connection, is still managing to get enough threat actor space to be able to deploy these attacks successfully is a sort of mind-bending thing in and of itself. And that's where we see cryptocurrency very often as a detractor, because how else are you going to move that money around? We also see attackers, because ransomware now is not something that's only for sophisticated attackers, because it's being provided as a service. You Google it, you can find stuff on the dark web, you hook up for a service, and then you deploy the tool to all of your victims. So when it's being done like that, you don't need to be this sublime super hacker. You can just be anyone who knows how to use Google and a credit card. And the same thing is true for when you see attacks now, also on things like crypto miners. So if people are doing miners, we see that there is a natural interest in being targeted. And we see that in very specific geographies. At Adavas, we had a very specific attack where we saw in Russia and Ukraine a target just for doing these mining operations. And we have a blog about it, and it's around one very specific operation called Coin Helper. So I think you'll find examples that are pretty pervasive and prevalent for crypto miners, ransomware, and then there's also people who are just trying to attack those people that are using cryptocurrency and trying to steal their wallet addresses.
Okay. Now, just to finish, with on a big note. So let's fantasize about the future. Do you believe in the future of cryptocurrencies?
So, yes, I do, because I do think that there will always, it's like saying, can we see a future without the potential to barter? Do we see, because there are things that I think once discovered, the genie's never going to go back into the bottle.
Yes.
We will always have a barter economy. There will always be people that'll say, I'll babysit for free if you will paint my roof. So there will, oh, well, I don't know that anyone has roofs painted. That was a poor example, but you know.
Again, yes,
so you know what I mean. I think crypto currency is here to stay only because it works. It provides a solution to a problem that's existed for decades for people who do not have access to banks. I genuinely believed, I was working in the mobile telecommunications industry for a very long time. I thought that prepaid top-up transfer, like when you have a prepaid top-up amount and you put it in your phone and then you transfer it, that was going to be the future, because how else can people move money to each other if they can't have a credit card or a bank account, because the bank says, well, sorry, I will never give you a bank account because I cannot trust you. So I think that this is really a solution. So that solution is not going anywhere as long as this economic situation exists, of this entire group of people. So
no, I couldn't agree more. I think it's a future. It could be painful, but I think that one day we'll see the basket of crypto to replace dollar as a reserve currency. So people say I'm just it's a wild fantasy, but I think we are heading to this destination. So and it's about ancient monetary system, and about, as you said, millions, no, billions of people now, billions of people that have no other access to monetary system, to financial instruments. So that means Avast will never be out of business because more digital transactions means more bad actors trying to capitalize on it, to steal. So the cybersecurity products will only grow in price. Okay, on
well,
this optimistic note, so just your final word.
no, I really hope that it's not only going to go in price. I hope that what grows in the future is a common sense of security and privacy that we all deserve. And I hope that we are able also in the future to provide that for free with the same quality, so that you don't have to worry if you can pay or afford security and privacy, because it's a right for all of us.
Jay Bellew, thank you very much. So that's the and I hope this conversation lifted the spirit of our audience, so they will see that the benefits will eventually outweigh the negatives of technological progress. Thank you, and see you next time on Garry on Lockdown.